What does it take for a server to become a legend? For Hydroponic, it was a perfect storm of players, innovation, and timing. So there's a lot to cover, 20 minutes in fact, and it's quite a lot of yapping. So let's not waste any more time here and get straight into it and cover what makes a golden age for a server. So before we get into the more deeper details, we should start with some background information. So this version of Hydro actually started in early 2020 and it lasted all the way until early 2022. It was actually the longest continuous uptime of a hydroponic server, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. 2 full years? I mean, I couldn't do that nowadays, I'll just put it that way. And we also fully embraced the hydroponic branding, and we actually got a more modern version of the hydroponic logo from the older, more weird, crazy version. So one actually fun thing about this server is that we actually finally really finalized our rivalry with the server called R&R. And they were our main rival throughout this era, and actually a lot in the previous era too. Another key detail about this era was that, well, we started using Washington Plus, which is basically just an edited version of Washington. I think it's pretty simple to understand that one. This era saw a lot of innovations of plugins. We moved on to cool things like loot boxes. We were the first server in semi-RP to have loot boxes. It was command-based. It wasn't as cool as the Paradox unboxing plugin that would get introduced later on. We also saw a lot of innovation with modding as well. We got our own custom mod and a mod pack, which we will go into more detail in the modding section. They're going to be very fun. But one of the main points here is that we had economy, we had vault, and we had garage. The vault wipe was atrocious, horrible, an actual war crime, and Trojaner, to my knowledge, has still not fixed his plugin. So, don't want to spread hate, but, still mad about that. Not that I really care, but, that vault wipe was actually hell, okay? Not good. Very bad. Literally just losing everything in your vault randomly for no reason. Great plugins. We love our plugins. We also had a really cool system called bank-robbery for a time, which is basically, when you put a drill down and you hit a mega locker, and eventually, when you defended it long enough, it dropped coins you could sell for money. It's basically the precursor to Koth and Envoys. There's a lot of other cool plugin stuff too, but those are the main ones I wanted to talk about. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is that, we had a lot of management reforms that reduced abuse, betrayals, and stabilized a lot of the things of the server. And the revenue grew. A minimum of 600 to 1,000 a month, with definite big highs from some people that we call whales who bought absurd amount of stuff, spent $3,000 for some reason, and they did it because they wanted to get friends with staff and get a better chance at being staff, so they bought staff ranks, other players ranks, they bought the money, all these different things, just to get them to like them. They also lied about what they worked as. Honestly, it's more sad than it is funny. I feel bad for them, but I guess, I'm a little mad they're wealthy and I'm not, so, I'm petty like that. Anyway, let's not get into any further delay here and get on to the more in-depth sections, starting with maps and safe zones. For a good chunk of this era, we actually still use Golf Course and Kent Raceway as the twin safe zones, with them both being, for the most part, metal bases for the early sections of this era, but eventually we still moved on to having map editor safe zones, still usually using those spots, mostly just Golf Course. Kent was also used for some of it, but usually it was moved out because it's kind of small for having that. We still used it. Metal bases were retired, and it made things a lot easier, though unfortunately windows that were placed in map editor did not happen until the next era. I guess, I guess we didn't really try looking into that, but didn't do that. We had some pretty fun ones like the projects, which is literally meant to represent the poor place, which at the time was actually the only safe zone before we added in Golf Course as well, which is pretty funny. It was above Everett, it was on a hill, very tiny. It's kind of crazy because during that little period of time we had that, the server was very low pop, and it was pretty funny. I just wanted to mention because the project is diabolical to have as a safe zone name, but it was one of my favorites and the most memorable one. Man, because I don't remember any of the other ones because they were just called safe zone, but hey, the project's fun. And then obviously we had the Everett Peninsula, or Everett Isle, whatever you want to call it, which is just using that entire subsection of the map where those connected with 2 bridges as a safe zone. One big area that allowed people to traverse the entirety of safe zone. Made it a lot easier and connected people. A lot better for shops, but during that time we still had lag walls, which is not fun. Lag walls, you ran into it, big lag spike, not fun. The way we fixed this was having the safe zone disconnected into 3 different parts. Still connected by roads and all that, but in 3 different chunks to reduce on lag. So we had a rich area, the main shop area, and then a middle class area. Worked really well, but it took a big chunk of the map. and somehow didn't really change much. Very nice, use that a lot of the time, but that was for the majority of this era. Now, for the main part of this chapter, we have the Silent Dawn detour, which this happened around January 2020, and this is what we got, our own custom map. And it went as well as you might expect for me. It lasted one wipe before reverting back to Washington Plus, because it was fun and proven and stable. Now, let's explain what happened with Silent Dawn, because it is a cluster, you know. So first thing that went wrong was the map files for the entire map were lost, and they had to remake the entire map from scratch. I'll be honest with you, if this happened to me, I would give up on the entire project and just forgo the pay, because honestly, I ain't dealing with that if I'm doing something like that. If you guys know how long mapping takes, you would crash out too. And somehow, they still went back and remade the map. I respect them for that, but they gave us something that was crap, and then they did something even worse. Next thing that happened was the map was terrible. Horrible mess, very unoptimized. For whatever reason, they thought it was a good idea to make the entirety of the riverbed like an actual realistic riverbed, place a billion trillion assets all in the riverbed, which, if you guys saw Unturned back then, being super unoptimized and low FPS, went as much as you expected. It was horrible, awful. Provided somebody to help fix these mistakes, this developer would just do some of the things we asked them to, and then just make random other changes we didn't even ask for. One time they just added a random military base, no idea why they did that. Another thing, the map was terrible for PvP, and overall was executed very poorly. And then they charged $200, which we paid. Then the developer would go on to say that I never paid them, which was a lie. And they convinced people easily because my ops would just believe anything bad about me without question. Anyway, this era wasn't only just about maps and safe zones. There's a lot of cool modding stuff we should talk about. So let's get on to that. Yes, mods. Something that makes Unturned just so amazing and fun to play, right? This era actually had a lot of really cool mods. You know, obviously you had Nordic Armory, which is the GOAT gun mod we had at the time. We had the Yeah mod, which is basically just our custom mod pack, the early version of it before it became Yeah Ultimate. And we had a lot of random stuff in it at first. We just went around and asking a ton of different mod creators about if we could use stuff. And it somehow worked. And we have a very large list of mods we can use. Yes, I love asking permission. Then we have Epic Gears pack. A few of the ones I want to make note of are the Singularity Condenser, the Holy Hand Grenade, the MK3, and the Terraria mods. And maybe also the Dubstep. These guns are base and should be mentioned. And yeah, another cool thing about these mods that we included a lot of them in the custom airdrops we had. And at the time, this was before like things became at a point where rare, cool items were not as valuable, and you needed to do more than just that for them to be valued by people. And people went insane over them, and they were special in the minds of the player base. So very interesting. So a really big one is the Quixotic custom arsenal, which I should mention that the Quixotic name is only something that ever came into existence when the mods actually was published to the workshop for other people to use. Originally, it was just called Yeah, because it was custom and it wasn't for public use. But generally, these guns, which are based on the game SAS Zombie Assault 3, has a lot of really fun weapons that I think, you know, made the game really cool. These guns were craftable in-game, and they were crafted by Liquid, which you got at the Scorpion 7. Now, when it first released, it had to be rebalanced a ton of times, because obviously it was not very well balanced. But people used them, they were great, really great. Now onto the infamous boosts. Now, if you don't know what boosts are, they're basically speed and jump boost. Armors and weapons, which had these boosts, could give you them whenever you held them. And basically, this change that we added in was something that was gradual, and it made movement become king. And we made armors have these stats. They give you speed, jump boost, and they basically made these different items impactful, valuable, and, you know, desirable. And they made armor the backbone of the economy. So back then, when armor was all non-drop, you had to get these armor sets through airdrops. Though when they were first introduced, you had to buy them through a kit. That didn't last very long, as you could imagine. But all of the different pieces were in airdrops, and you had to collect the entire set to get it. Back then, there was no fragments and no cases, so you just had to hold on to the entire armor set and, you know, put it in a locker and whatever. And honestly, it was crazy because back then it was way less balanced than it is today when we had it in, because the boosts were very high and the armor values were decent. And somehow the server didn't die even with that kind of being unfair for new players. Probably because people were selling them like crazy. But the non-drop rules did let more players engage with the meta without rage quitting after losses somehow. I assume that's probably because it's a different community back then, different tolerance for stuff like that. But armor was extremely impactful. And the weapons too made a lot of really balanced changes we had to make over time, but it made the PvP feel a lot more fluid and it was new. I think Warzone, other servers back then also had a movement of some sort, but we were the first semi-RP to really utilize it. Though all the other servers never utilized it at the same level of Hydro. They only really used it years later and they used like custom knives or whatever dumb crap they use. But yeah, drop armor, which would be basically an evolution of this, would become the basis of the transition. You know, this armor would be the transition into the next system of the next era, which would be very impactful overall. Overall, the boosts are extremely impactful to Hydro in this era and became a massive part of its culture. And I think it was very positive overall, even if it was maybe a little bit unbalanced. Anyway, let's move on to chapter 4. So yeah, during this era, we actually saw, Hydro's rivalry with R&R solidify. Now, R&R, very similar server, semi-RP, very close. We had a lot of different instances and issues, but Hydro would come to dominate, and we solidified this dominance over time. Hydro did beat R&R during this era pretty hard. They shut down eventually and were replaced with another server, and we became the dominant semi-RP. Now, it should be noted that another server, Hexxis, took their place, as mentioned earlier. And, well, they didn't really do much. They could never beat us, Hexxis, or any of these servers. And basically, that's it. Besides, a dev once copied R&R's config files, specifically permissions, and just copy and pasted it into our server for some reason. I had nothing to do with this, by the way. He just did it because he was lazy, I guess. Not a fun moment, but there was really no bad blood from it. I just don't know why he did that. Very goofy, Next thing is the fact that, well, Hydro had a merger with another server. So, to set the scene, in early 2020, Hydro was struggling, didn't have enough players, and, well, another server, which was another rival at the time, was down for unrelated reasons, leaving their players idle. Now, I saw an opportunity, a pragmatic revival, admitted greed, power play, to secure their store and play rapid growth. Now, the way I'm describing it makes it sound way worse than it actually was. I just wanted power and dominance. So I propose that we merge with asset sharing and operational alignment of sorts. Now, basically, this whole situation was interesting. We talked about merging the stores and, well, eventually, 5/11/2020, our discords combined. Communities brought under one roof. The effects of this, as you imagine, were not great for Hexxis. Well, I guess nobody really got permanently hurt, but Hydro benefited greatly. Our population bounced up and the server was revived and no longer dead. The culture blended a bit and created some fresh energy, and many Hexxis players in that time from the merger stayed and became regular long-term Hydro loyalists. Though, as you could imagine, the Hydro merger with Hexxis fell apart. Jordan was growing uneasy about store control and subordination, but he was still very open to it. And I was, for whatever reason back then, a cutthroat and wanted power. And I saw the writing on the wall and, well, I pulled the plug because I knew this was never going to work out long term and would create problems. I was really, really a bad person back then. No, well, I guess in society nowadays, if I was an actually business owner, people would say I'm amazing, but if you're a real person, this is bad. Anyway, we kept that momentum, and a chunk of the Hexxis players stayed, and some of them went back, but it revived people. People came back to the server because they saw people were playing, or new people, mostly, really, if we're being honest. And they resumed as the chief rival later on after R&R died out. And we learned the lesson that I should try to stop trying to be power hungry and take everything for myself, for selfish reasons. And by this time, I stopped doing stuff like this, and this kind of a transition, I guess part of it's growing up and all that, but I stopped doing all these super cutthroat things to get server to succeed. And yeah. And for the record, I don't do stuff like this anymore. So yeah, that's about it. All the stuff about our, opponents and rivals. So let's move on to the next chapter. So yeah, during this era, we actually built a proper management system with plenty of reforms to actually make things a little bit better. So a lot of things we did, we introduced clear permissions, we had a strike appeal process, and better expectations that reduced abuse and the random shutdowns. A lot of the load and workload on myself shifted over to more management, allowing me to do less when I already didn't really do that much, being real here. And operations steadied and was less chaotic. And we also saw a lot of new management and competent at that, and staff too, that helped, of course. Got Squishy was a manager, Torkel was an admin, Kronos, who I'm gonna murder one day, manager and staff. Had a massive glow up, by the way. Actually became somebody, I suppose. And then Rain second, who, foreshadowing, big character. And then Captain Trouble, who he thinks he's Southern or something, I don't know. All these characters, very important and had a big role to play, or small, I guess, for some of them. They are all very important, all very helpful people that did a big part in helping make this era very impactful and successful. Now, on to me and Camilla's relationship. We had a high trust, high friction dynamic. You can probably think of a married couple that shouldn't and should be married at the same time. Yeah, that's basically us. We would fight all the time and then get into conversations for like an hour or two in a voice chat about stuff. I was there for them. They had issues. I have issues too, I suppose, but I was there for them. I probably wasn't really that great of a friend if I'm being real, but, you know, Camilla, or Rain back then, was pivotal, though, in reducing the workload on myself and just being very helpful. We had many issues, and yet we shared a very strong bond. We were basically Naruto and Sasuke. Kill me, please. I really just think that's the best way to put it. Anime references, right, guys? That's cool. I'm cool, right? I'm cool, right? I'm cool? Okay, I'm not. Anyway, yes, the Traitor League. This is a very fun one. I would give all their names, but I don't want to start drama, and I don't want to get random DMs from a certain individual who will do it constantly for no reason, even though I don't look at them. Well, anyway, they were a cluster of managers and admins who grew very close and, well, formed a clique, or a faction. And as you might know, when a lot of your managers and admins are forming together into a group, that might be a problem for the stability of you as a head or for your server. Well, they basically backed up each other and created friction between head managers, and, well, eventually they led a massive rebellion. Honestly, I would rebel against me too if I was there. Let's be real here, I'm kind of an idiot. But, well, they went off to form their own server. And not to throw shade, but their server didn't last very long. They also just joined the call before they went and called me the N-word. There's probably a clip of this, but, you know, I mean, I am a cracker, right? Like, you know, I'm like the whitest person west of the Mississippi, for being real here, right? You know, I don't think that word would be a great descriptor of myself, but, you know, they do them, right? Anyway, the betrayal was very damaging for trust and would lead to stronger rules and practices to prevent cliques from forming again. You know, these reforms were meant to limit future damage and made rehiring discipline more consistent, but basically like tried to minimize these groups from forming by trying to establish a more closer bond with the whole staff team as a whole and the server. And also just not being idiots when it comes to being management, you know, because we were not very smart in the beginning of this, let's be real here. Now, for this last section of this chapter, we have Kronos. And I just want to rant for a second about this guy. Kronos' glow up from strikes to real contributions. Bro thinks he's him. He's not him, bro. He's not him, bro. But I guess he became a manager. You know, he got better. He management for other servers a couple times after this era shut down. You know, he thinks he's cool, you know. Also, willingness to rehabilitate people too, I guess. Cool. But we're not gonna forget the times he admin edited my safe zone, or our safe zones, into the goddamn sky. Who does this guy think he is, bro? He's not him. He does stupid shit like this all the time, bro. I swear, this guy. Oh my god, bro. He's just a goofy odd guy, okay? And yeah, he was mostly just a pawn between me and Camilla, between our different, you know, feuds of sorts. And yeah, he used to be a suck up to me back when he was better, you know? He used to like me. He doesn't like me anymore, by the way. He doesn't like me. He secretly actually like, hates me, and one of these days he's gonna kill me in my sleep. Anyway, Kronos, if you're watching this, get good, buddy. Anyway, let's move on to the next chapter. So this is where things get a little interesting. This is the late era tensions. Obviously, during this time, this is like near the end of this era, by the way, is the gradual increase in tensions between myself and Camilla, or Rain. Basically, there was growing factionalism, if we're being real, and constant arguing over the smallest of things. There's also major disagreements that were caused by stubbornness on both parties, though a lot of people say it was my stubbornness, but, you know, I tend to agree because I'm an idiot. But, you know, attempts to make things up were made, but, you know, they really only just delayed the inevitable, let's be real here. And it made every single change take far longer than it really should have. And, well, having fired Camilla in the past and rehiring them, you can imagine a lot of things were just not so great, right? Things were very stressful, and other managers were often used as pawns to get things in one direction or the other. And, well, at this time, a lot of other managers besides myself and Camilla didn't really do anything. No offense to them. Not really their fault since they were never really given any opportunities to do anything, but they were used literally only as votes to get us things go one way or the other, which isn't great. As you can imagine, these events led to the inevitable shutdown in December of 2022. Basically, a leadership deadlock, stress, and, well, bad issues. Basically, the server was still active, but was weakened by this internal strain. And, well, honestly, I didn't want to have to go to a decision to fire Camilla because I knew it would split the entire server. Well, mainly the management. I don't think the community really cared, let's be real here. So I decided to shut down the server with honor because I didn't want to create more issues, and I didn't want to, you know, break things away with Camilla and Kronos and everyone else because I still cared about them. So I decided just to shut things down. The server was already running for a good amount of time, and I decided that we'd do the best thing to shut it down and not continue with this drama and stress that was constantly happening. It was actually really crazy because the community reaction was very significant. I've never seen people so upset about a server shutting down than this era. Every other era was like, whatever, but people were genuinely devastated when the server was announced to be shutting down. I've never ever seen that ever happen again, and I don't know if I ever will. Maybe if some people say that when I shut down this channel, if that ever happens. No, they won't. But it's hard to describe, but it was very significant. So for the aftermath of what happened after the shutdown, the server remained down for about a year. And, players and staff obviously dispersed to other places. Our rivals, once sidelined, quickly moved to fill in the void. A lot of things happened. R&R came back and rose very much to the top, and a lot of other servers killed in the void too, because back then, more servers were actually able to exist without just getting murdered immediately. Obviously, the important things that Camilla and Kronos, alongside some other staff, eventually went on to reboot Hydro. And there's a lot more to that story that we will, if we do make another episode, the 4th episode of the Hydroponic history, will be included into that video, because it's a lot of drama and a lot of lore there. But that is mainly for the next version of the Hydro, so I'm going to leave that out. But they did try to do that, and there was stuff with that, so I thought it would be important to mention it. I'll be honest, this era was very impactful. It was probably the most important era of Hydro and my favorite overall. And that's mainly because, well, they had the best community. Now, I know a lot of people nowadays that know Hydro, remember it fondly, are people who care mostly for PvP in the drop armor version of Hydro. And I'll be honest with them, as much as the Hydro did succeed in the next era, it was never like this era. The community was never there. It got players all the time, sure, but this era actually had heart, it had community, it had engagement, people cared. And honestly, I just never seen that again. It's why a lot of times I really try to bring this back in a lot of the future servers in the 5th era, which definitely won't be getting an episode, by the way. It'll probably be incorporated in episode 4. This era is just, well, impactful, It makes me really wish we had more time of this because it was very nice. But obviously Unturned is going in a new direction, and honestly, I don't think it really needs Hydro anymore, if we're being real. But I do have a lot of regrets. I think that the way that things went with Kronos and Camilla, I have a lot of regrets about how that went. I definitely wronged them in many ways, but, obviously I have a little bit of an excuse because I was young, but it doesn't really make it right. And I've tried to make it up with them, and we're cool now for the most part. But, I think we were all a little bit crazy during COVID, so I guess slight pass, maybe. Well, okay, let's be real. Probably not. Really amazing era, and, I'm really happy I get to share it with you all. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.